All right, so today, or whatever day you're watching this video, I mean, it could be morning, afternoon, evening, whatever floats your boat. We are going to be talking through how to create a promotional graphic in Photoshop. If you haven't checked out the other design videos that I've done in InDesign and Illustrator, Canva, this might be the one that you're looking for. So I'm going to show you how to create a graphic for this example. I'm going to be talking you through creating a graphic for this specific portion of the class, so learning how to design. And we're going to be using the mood board that I created in the mood board video in this month's capsule. So the first thing that I'm going to say is that Photoshop to me is used for a lot of different things. So I design websites in Photoshop. I also alter photography in Photoshop. So I'm making structural changes to a photo, like covering blemishes or, completely erasing a portion of my photo. I also will create graphics occasionally. And when I say graphics, I just mean like any kind of design element that includes photography, typography, textures, vectors, things like that. So the reason why I would probably use Photoshop is either because the client of mine uses Photoshop and then they can alter my file, or I'll probably use Photoshop because I'm using a template on an online printing website like uprinting or moo.com. I tend to download their Photoshop templates and I use their templates just to make sure that my file is completely formatted correctly. A reason why I might not use Photoshop is if I'm going to be using a lot of vectors, which are basically shapes that can be altered and scaled to any size. And another reason I might not use Photoshop is if I'm going to heavily rely on bleeds, which basically means like any part of the document that needs to bleed off of the edge completely when it's printed. So all that to say is we're going to get started. I'm going to click New. I'm going to type in Diamond Membership, and I'm going to choose just an 8.5 by 11 file. I'm going to leave it at CMYK just because we might, if we ended up printing this, then, well, you know what? I'm actually going to do RGB. I'm going to say that this file is predominantly going to be used online, and so if that's the case, RGB is great. So the background will be white. Everything else is good. I'm going to create my file. So this is what it ends up looking like. If you're familiar at all with Adobe software, then all of these little panes or modules or whatever you want to call them will pop up, and you can always make them smaller or bigger. Just depends on what you want. I heavily depend on the layers panel when I'm in Photoshop. So when I'm in Illustrator or InDesign or Canva, I don't really care so much about layers, but I do care about layers. I tend to really utilize them when I'm in Photoshop because I might be doing something like erasing things or creating textures and laying down some of those things. So I'm going to remove my background color for now because I don't really want it to be pink. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to bring in my mood board. If you hear my dog walking around, it's because he's walking around. So I'm going to go in and grab my mood board, and I'm going to just drag it into my artboard. So here you can see my mood boards right here. I don't tend to use any area off of my artboard, so if I drag it off, I really can't see it very well. And so what I tend to do is just leave it where it is, but I can just toggle over here on my layers panel, and so I can make it disappear, or I can bring it back in if I want to reference it. So something that I haven't been able to do in InDesign or Illustrator yet is utilize some of these shapes. And so that means like some of these shapes down at the bottom left with that tote, taking the heavy lifting out of mortgages. I also haven't really played with some opacity and making some things a little bit more opaque or less opaque. And so we're going to play around with utilizing some of this. The last thing is just any kind of handwritten element. So I really like using Photoshop for that purpose. I love the way the brushes are. If you end up ever wanting to get some sort of tablet, it really works well. I like the amount of detail that you get. So I'm first going to type out, like I have in all of my other tutorials, some of the first pieces of text or writing. So learn how to design. And here you can see upon typing this out, I'm already at a pretty large type size, but you can see here that it's intersecting, the line below is intersecting the line above. So over here, I'm going to just change that to 60, just so that it matches your type size. And I'll leave it how it is right here. And so like I said, over here I have my mood board that's just hidden, and anytime I want to look at it, I can just toggle. If you don't like doing this, you could always just have your mood board printed out, or you could have it, you know, in preview or, you know, in another file. That is another option, and so I'll show you. If you wanted to just open this up as its own file, then here you can see there's tabs, so I can go back and forth. So I'm going to remove that, or not even remove it, I'm just going to make it invisible right now. And if I want to reference my mood board, I'll just click over to this other tab. So the next thing that I'm going to do is figure out if I want a specific background color. The reason why I'm not completely deleting this mood board is because I do want to be able to reference it for color. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take this kind of taupey background color, and then I'm going to make my mood board invisible for right now. And I'm going to just layer this on top, and let's see. So this is where I think Photoshop can get confusing. So down here you can see our colors are kind of that taupey beige and then white. Well, what happens with shapes is I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to copy the hex code, and in my layers panel, I'm going to double click and make sure that that is true. And it's still not taking. If that's still not going to work, up here, because my shape is selected, I'm going to get rid of the outline, and I'm going to add in this color. So basically what was happening was this shape was calling on having a stroke, and I really wanted it to fill. So I had to actually implement it up here. That's where I think, in general, Photoshop can be confusing, especially to beginners. And what I would want to do is, like in Illustrator, it's a lot of just like dragging and dropping, completely like selecting the image. So even when I'm selecting this this text box, you can't really see that I've selected it unless you look over here in the layers channel or the panel. And there's a lot of different ways to make it so that you do see the outline. This is just how I use Photoshop, so I'm not going to really go back and change all of my settings. There's a way in Photoshop, if you wanted to, when you select this text box, to see that outline, but that's just really not how I work. So understand that there's a lot of different ways you can maximize Photoshop. I only have a limited, knowledge base about this program. I use it on the regular, but we all find things that work for us. So I'm going to make my mood board viewable again. And what I'm going to do is choose this blue color. And what I do is I grab it, and when I'm grabbing it, I'm just doing Command C for copy, but you can just right-click copy. And then go back to here, and then in my character panel down here, I can just make this blue. And so I'm starting off with it being centered, pretty large. I'm going to add a little bit more space in between. So I'm going to change this to 70, this to 50, and it just sort of spaces things out really nicely. And then what I'm going to do, because we haven't been able to do it, is add some of these shapes. It's very easy to do in other programs, but I think what I want to specifically do is show you how I like to use brushes. So over here on the panel, you can see I've selected the brush tool. And then up here, you can actually choose what kind of brushes you want. I've downloaded a ton of different kinds of brushes. There are a ton of resources that are free brushes online. You can purchase them. Creative Market is a great place to get brushes. You can make your own brushes just by loading them in. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to find some sort of organic shape, like a circle, something like that. So I'm going to choose this circle 30. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. So I don't want that circle necessarily to sit on top of anything else. So I'm going to click here where it says create new layer. And I'm going to, over here, make this brush bigger. So I'm going to make it about 1400. You can also, with the brackets, go up and down like this. And I'm going to just plop that down right here. And so you can see that brush emulates sort of this watercolor / ink stain, which I think is really fun. The thing about it is when you put down this brush color, that's pretty much the color. You can't really double click this and change the color. You can, however, if I were to take this bright green color right here, and again, I'm just copying that hex code, and you can go over to this FX, which is basically different effects layer styles, and you can do a color overlay. So I'm going to just do that, and you can see here it's previewing white, and I'm going to make it that green color. And so you can see there's a little bit of opacity happening because you can see that text through there, and all you have to do to see the text above that wash or that brush is just drag this up in the layers panel. You also can do the exact same thing. You can do command bracket up and down to move things around just as a shortcut. The next thing I'm going to do is create another layer. So I want each of these brushes to be on its own layer. I'm going to make this visible, and I'm going to pull a pink color off of here. Stay within this empty layer, this layer 2, and I'm going to go back to my brush tool, and I'm going to choose one that's similar. I think I'm going to do this one. I'm going to make it bigger. So this is more like 3200. And I made it so that it fit completely within this, so that now as its own layer, I can kind of move things around and bring it up like this. You also could make it smaller if you wanted. You could make it bigger. I think I'm going to make it overlap and kind of split the learn how to design in half. So now that the pink and this color overlay green colors here, I'm going to create a third layer, view my mood board, and let's pick the last color I think will be this bright orange. And so I'm going to take that layer, make it invisible again, click my brush tool. And now I'm just looking for a third shape that doesn't feel repetitive, doesn't feel too pointy. That's a horrible way to describe it. But you don't want it to have any harsh edges, at least I don't right now. What could be cool is if we did a number. Maybe we do 4. Okay, let's try this. I don't know if this will look cool, but go like that. No. I was thinking, if you want to understand my thinking, I was thinking through if we could make it so that we're describing that you would learn from 4 programs, Canva, InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop. But it kind of didn't really translate well. So now I'm just playing around with the size, seeing if this feels too crazy, which to me, I'm actually wanting it to come off and bleed off the bottom right edge of this area. So I think what I'll do, I'm going to choose this one. You can see it's really small. Some of these don't get super huge as far as size goes. Try that. And see how this looks a little blurry? This is just the quality of the brush. So sometimes you get these brushes loaded in and they're just really not made to scale so huge. And so instead, I'm going to I'm going to choose this one because it feels rounded enough. We'll see if it scales well. Yeah, I actually really like that. If you can see, it's like really subtle. There's like a slight outline happening here, and I think that that is really nice. So this font feels a little too, I don't know, not plain, but it just feels a little not really what I'm going for. So just like in Illustrator, if you've watched that video already, there's the ability to preview the text. This font isn't horrible. I kind of like how the W is a little weird, but I think what I really want is for the font to feel a lot more like this National Theater poster. And so I just kind of take it around. This feels a little too organic in shape. I want something pretty bold, but also something that doesn't have these sort of rounded. Actually, I like that. So this is like, this is how it happens. You just think through, what do you actually like? And seeing it in motion or in use, actually, it makes a huge difference. So, but I'm gonna just try and see what this looks like. No, I don't like that. So for other elements, I think what I'm gonna do is, let's take a look at all of this. I'm going to add in some almost like handwritten elements. And we're gonna do that the same way that we did these layers of blocks of color. And so I'm going to create a new layer, go back to my brushes like I originally did, and I'm going to just look for a really thin line. We'll see if that's thin enough. I'm just looking through the rest. And I'm going to just stamp that right here. And to me that feels a little too thin, so I'm going to go a little bit bigger, and I'm going to make it blue. Just like that. And again, this is in its own layer. That way I can really move things as I need. So I can choose this layer, and then I can, with the Command key, select both and just move these up, depending on where I want it. The next thing that I might want to do is just in really small additional text as like a supporting blurb if you were describing what this class is all about. Using Photoshop. Actually, I just had an idea. See, you're really watching me work through this in real time. I'm going to do this. Photoshop. Down here, I'm going to write Illustrator. And all I'm doing to copy these segments and basically like duplicate them is holding down, and then once you see the double arrows, you can just drag it and it creates basically a duplicated element. I'm going to write Canva here. And right now I'm just sort of centering everything to the eye. It's not perfect, because you don't want to spend that much time on something and then not even like it. Here I'm spinning things around. And then here I'll write InDesign. And actually what I'm thinking is so this layer that we created with those little lines, I'm actually going to erase, I'm going to delete that layer because I just got another idea. So I'm going to create a new layer, go back to my brush tool where this is, make this smaller, and just make these lines, we're going to make them connect. So that has all of my horizontal lines, and then I'm going to create a new one for the verticals. So I'm going to stamp it right here. It probably needs to be a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to, this is in its own layer, apart from the horizontal lines. I'm going to go like this. And then again with the double arrows, go like this. You can start manually centering everything the way it should look. Oops. So sometimes you end up taking the wrong thing. So what I'm going to do is take these two layers over here in the panel, and then you can actually just drag it into that and make a new layer, and it makes a copy. So this graphic is going to just feel a little bit different because we're communicating with text differently. So in the past designs that I've made, they feel a little bit more explanatory, like using these programs, and it feels a little bit more traditional. It's fun to really get outside of the box and still have supporting elements that feels creative and doesn't always look exactly the same. So I'm going to add in the pertinent info. I think I've just been making all of this up. This isn't an actual class. But what I'm going to do is make this smaller. So let's make it like 0.30. Bring this down. And we'll just leave it as blue. I like that all the text is blue and really standing out from the background blotches of color. Blotches is an official term. You can feel free to use it. And then if you watched I think it was my Illustrator video, I'm going to just do what I did in that one and just create a little bit of a custom element that's like in the middle with this text. That circle feels too big. So again, I always do Command T to transform, which means alter it. And I'm going to go like this. And then again, I'm holding down, I'm hovering over the circle, pushing Option, and then if I want to bring it down here, hold Shift while you do that, and it will make sure that it stays in line. So again, these are ways that just make it feel a little less like a template. Anytime you can add in these really custom elements like line work or circles, it really adds a lot to the design, and I think it makes it feel a little bit more thought out. So you can, if you want to, just make sure that the Canva and InDesign are centered up. Same with the Photoshop and the Illustrator. And you can just use this shortcut up here to align. And then I might take the Illustrator, the dot, the how to learn how to design, the dot, the Photoshop, and again, just make sure everything's lined up. And that's what I would do. Again, we're looking back to the mood board if we want, and I feel like it's a really fun way to look and see how you can interpret design that you've seen, and it doesn't have to just completely rip something off. This mood board really helps you think through, we're very much taking inspiration from this tote, and you can make it your own with your own colors, adding in that pink, and making something that will really catch people's eye. In order to save this, I would want to save it as a PSD first, which means that it's editable. So I'm going to keep the layer box checked with the color profile. Click OK. Then I'm going to save it also as a JPEG. So hopefully that was helpful. Like I mentioned, each program is super unique. I love using Photoshop to create these textures. There's a ton of resources online, Skillshare, Creative Live, Linda, that teaches you how to get really specific in Photoshop. It's a very robust program, but hopefully looking at how you do layers and how you can get really creative with some of these brushes can open up your mind into creating graphics that are really custom for you. Thank you.